The snow had been falling for 3 days when Meredith Voss finally opened the footlocker. She had moved around it for 11 months. It sat at the foot of the bed in the spare room the way a stone sits in a stream, the household current simply parting around it, quiet and unmoved. Her neighbor Darlene had offered to help once, and Meredith had said no thank you with such flat finality that Darlene never brought it up again. There was a padlock on it, a small brass thing, and Meredith had the key on a hook in the kitchen beside her car keys. She walked past it every morning. She never took it down. Until the morning the snow came in sideways off the ridge and the power flickered twice, and the dog across the street began barking at nothing, and Meredith Voss, 71 years old, stood in her kitchen in her wool socks, with her coffee going cold, and thought, enough. If this story touches something in you, take a moment to subscribe and turn on the bell. Stay with this until the end. It matters. She brought the key across the hall. The lock opened on the first try, the way things do when they were never really waiting for permission, only for the person to be ready. The lid came up on a smell she had not expected, a smell she recognized from somewhere distant, gun oil and canvas, and something that reminded her of her husband's hands after a day of working on the truck, though Harold had not done either in a long time before he died. Inside was what she expected and what she did not expect in equal measure. She found what she had half expected: a folded uniform blouse, sergeant's chevron still pinned and sharp, a commendation she had never seen still in its envelope, a photograph of Harold at 22, standing in a line of young men she did not know in a place she could not identify, a small stone cross on a cord. These things made sense. Harold had been a Marine once, before the decades of farming and hardware stores and slow Sunday mornings that she had thought of as his real life. His life with her. What she had not expected was a letter, handwritten, addressed to a name she did not recognize. And beneath the letter, folded once, a document she recognized all too well. She read the document first because the letter frightened her, and she needed something concrete to hold. It was a promissory note. It bore Harold's signature. It was dated 14 months before he died, and it specified a debt of $62,000 owed to a company called Meridian Restoration Group, LLC, secured against the property and land she was sitting in right now. Meredith read it 3 times. She set it on the foot of the bed and looked out the window at the snow. Harold had never mentioned $62,000, not once. Then she read the letter. It was written to a man named Garrett Cole, and it was written in Harold's handwriting, which she would have known in the dark. It was not long. It said, "Garrett, I know I have no right to ask. I know what happened, and I know what part I played in it not being fixed. But if something happens to me before I can put this right myself, I am asking you to find a way. You know what this land means. You know what they are doing around here. It is wrong, and I think you always knew that too. I am sorry for more than I can put in a letter. Harold." Meridian Restoration Group, she found out 2 days later at the county assessor's office, had filed a lien on her land. $62,000, interest compounding at a rate that made the county clerk, a careful woman named Jeanette Pruitt, press her lips together and look at the paper again. The note was enforceable. The lien was real, and Meridian Restoration Group had, according to their paperwork, the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings if the debt was not satisfied within 90 days of Harold's death, a period that had begun 11 months ago and was now effectively expired. Meredith sat in her car in the parking lot outside the assessor's office for 15 minutes before she drove home. When she got home, She called directory assistants and asked for a Garrett Cole, and was told there were 4 of them in the state of Montana alone. She asked for the one nearest to Kessler County. There was a pause. The operator said she could not confirm county-level location. Meredith thanked her and hung up. She pulled out the envelope the letter had come in. It had never been mailed. Harold had written it and put it in the footlocker and locked the lock, and it had stayed there. There was no return address. There was no address at all. She found the name in a different way, eventually. She asked Father Donovan at St. Anthony's, because Harold had gone there quietly in the last 2 years of his life, in a way he had never done before. Father Donovan sat with her for a while and then said he thought he knew the name and told her what he knew. Garrett, last he had heard, had been working ranches somewhere in the Flathead Valley, moving around the way men do when they are not done moving yet. He had a dog with him, people said, a German shepherd, a working dog from the military, though Father Donovan was not certain of the details. He had heard the name maybe once or twice in passing from Harold, who had spoken of him without a great deal of explanation, only with something in his voice that the priest had found worth remembering. Meredith went home and wrote a letter of her own to the last known post office box Father Donovan had, which was in a town called Millhaven, 60 miles north. She did not know if it would reach him. She did not know if he would respond. She did not know what Harold had owed him, or what Garrett might want in return, or whether any of this would help her save her house. She sealed the envelope on the kitchen table with the footlocker in the next room and the snow still falling outside, and she thought of Harold's handwriting and Harold's last written words to her. "I am sorry for more than I can put in a letter." She put the letter in the mailbox. She went inside and waited. Garrett was 39 years old, and he had been in Millhaven for 11 days when the letter came. He was staying in a cabin on the back end of a working spread, owned by a man named Dennis Hartwick, who needed help with fence repair and a drainage ditch that had been trying to flood the lower pasture since October. The arrangement suited them both. Dennis did not ask questions, and Garrett was not at a place in his life where he had answers he wanted to give. He was, by any accounting, in the middle of something he had not finished. He was not sure he would know when he had finished it, or what it would look like. He drove the roads. He did the work Dennis needed done. He ate at the diner in town on Thursday evenings because the woman who ran it made a beef and barley soup that was the closest thing to warmth he had figured out how to accept. And he sat by the window with his dog, and he thought about the same things he always thought about, which circled back to the same place no matter where he drove. The dog's name was Cinder. She was a German shepherd, 7 years old, retired from the Marines on the same papers that had retired Garrett from everything else. She had a black saddle over a deep rust-brown coat, with a pale blonde muzzle that had gone a little gray at the tips in the last year. She was 73 pounds, dense and square across the chest, and she had been the most reliable thing in Garrett's life for the last 6 years. She sat under the diner table on Thursday evenings with her chin on his boot, and she slept at the foot of his cot in the cabin. And when Garrett woke up in the cold dark of 3 a.m. with his fists clenched and his jaw aching, she was already there, already watching, as if she had been waiting for him to surface. He was not a man who talked easily about what had happened. He was a man who had spent 14 years as a Marine, the last 4 as a gunnery sergeant running combat dog handler teams, in places where the temperature and the terrain and the people with guns were all working against you at once, and he had come out of it with full function in all his limbs and something broken in a place he could not point to. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall and built like someone who had never stopped carrying weight. His hair was cut close, brown going gray at the sides. He had a beard he kept short out of habit, and a thin white scar along his right cheekbone from a piece of shrapnel that had not gone deep enough to do the damage it was attempting. His eyes were the particular steady gray of overcast sky, the kind that does not change much regardless of the weather. He picked up his mail from the Millhaven post office the same way he did everything, without announcement, on a Thursday morning before the diner opened. There were 2 pieces of mail. One was a parts catalog he had not requested. One was a letter from a woman named Meredith in a town called Renner, which he had never heard of, asking him if he was the Garrett who had served with a Harold Voss, and if so, whether he would be willing to speak with her. Garrett read the letter standing in the post office parking lot. The cold was the kind that comes in off the mountains in late November and does not apologize for itself. Cinder stood beside him and watched his face. He stood there for a while. He read the letter again. He did not know what Harold had told her. He did not know how Harold had found him, because Harold had not written to him, and he had not written to Harold, not in 12 years. He did not know what she wanted from him exactly beyond what the letter said, which was that she was in trouble, and she had found his name in a footlocker, and she was asking for help. What he did know was this: Harold Voss had saved his life once, in circumstances that no one had recorded correctly, and that Garrett had never talked about since. And Harold was dead, and Harold had somehow known where to send a letter that had never been mailed. Garrett put the letter in his jacket pocket and got in the truck. He drove south. Renner was a small town set in a valley between 2 ridges that caught the worst of the early winter and held it. It had a population of about 1,800, a grain elevator visible from the highway, a 2-block main street with a hardware store, and a pharmacy and a barber shop that had been in operation since 1948, according to the sign in the window. The surrounding land was a mix of winter wheat fields, gone flat and pale, and working farms with equipment visible in the yards. Garrett found the Voss property by the county road number in Meredith's letter. It was 43 acres of pasture and timber, a white farmhouse with green shutters, a red barn that needed paint on the north face, and a fence line that had been maintained recently. Posts all plumb, wire all tight. Someone had taken care of this place, Harold most likely, until Harold no longer could. He sat in the truck at the end of the drive for a moment. Cinder was upright in the passenger seat, her ears forward, already reading the property the way she always read new places, steady and thorough. And he turned in and drove up to the house. Meredith came out onto the porch before he had the engine off. She was a small woman, 71 years old, with white hair cut practically short, and the kind of posture that comes not from youth, but from decades of standing upright when standing upright was required. She wore a heavy gray sweater and boots, and she was watching him with an expression that was trying hard to be neutral and not quite succeeding. She looked at the truck. She looked at him when he got out. She looked at Cinder. When Cinder cleared the truck and stood beside Garrett in the gravel of the drive, something moved across Meredith's face that she did not try to control. Her hand went up to her mouth briefly and then came back down. "She looks like a dog Harold talked about," she said. "A dog from before." "Before what?" Garrett said. "Before he was my husband." Garrett held her eyes for a moment. "Can I come in?" he said. She brought them both in. She had coffee on, and she poured 2 cups without asking, and set a bowl of water on the floor for Cinder, who drank half of it, and then settled herself under the kitchen table in a way that made the room feel smaller and warmer. Meredith set the documents on the table between them. The promissory note, a copy of the lien filing, a letter from Meridian Restoration Group, addressed to the estate of Harold, and then below that to Meredith as surviving spouse and property heir, informing her in smooth legal language that the outstanding balance of $62,000 plus accrued interest of $9,800 was now due in full, and that absent payment within 30 days, proceedings to satisfy the secured debt through property liquidation would commence. Garrett read every page. He set them down. He picked up the promissory note again and read it more carefully. "Did Harold ever explain this to you?" he said. "Not one word?" Meredith said. "Not in 12 years of marriage." Garrett looked at the signature on the note. He looked at the company name. He looked at the date. "He signed this 4 months before his first hospitalization," Meredith said. "The doctors said afterward that there had been pressure on the blood vessels for some time before the stroke. Long before they caught it, he may not have been himself." Garrett set the note down carefully. "Who brought this to him?" he said. "Who walked up to this house with this paper?" Meredith opened a drawer and placed a business card on the table. It was expensive cardstock, the kind that has a slight weight to it. It read, "Meridian Restoration Group, LLC, Property and Agricultural Solutions." Below the company name, the text read, "Derek Sollers, Regional Director." Garrett turned the card over. There was nothing on the back. "He came to the house 3 times that I know of," Meredith said. "The first time, Harold spoke to him in the driveway. I watched from the window. The second time, I was in town. The third time was the week after Harold signed this." She tapped the note. "After that, he didn't come back." "What does Meridian do?" Garrett said. "As near as I can find," Meredith said, "they buy distressed farmland. They find properties with old debts, or owners with health troubles, or estates that are complicated, and they offer something they call restructuring. The county clerk told me she has seen 7 of these notes filed in this county in the last 3 years. 2 of the properties are already sold. The families are gone." Garrett sat with that. "Harold knew something about them," he said. It was not a question. "I believe so," Meredith said. "From the letter he left you. He said he knew what they were doing around here." "Did he ever tell you what?" "No." She folded her hands around her coffee cup. "Harold kept certain things to himself. He thought he was protecting me. It was one of the things we disagreed about." Garrett looked at Cinder under the table. She was watching him, her dark eyes quiet and serious. He had been in Mill Haven, and he had been moving, and he had been telling himself there was no particular reason to stop anywhere. Now he was sitting in a kitchen with a 71-year-old woman who had written a letter to a stranger because a dead man had left her no other road. And the thing that was broken in the place he could not point to was pressing against his ribs in a way that was hard to ignore. "I'm going to need to look at some things," he said. "Public records, the other properties they've touched. I want to talk to the families who lost land if they're still around. And I need to understand how Harold came to owe them money at all." Meredith nodded slowly. "I have 30 days," she said. "Then we should start in the morning," Garrett said. "Is the spare room available?" She looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not entirely read. Then she said, "Yes. I made it up when I got your call." The following morning was clear and hard with cold. Frost on the fence posts and the truck windows. The sky above the ridge a pale, clear blue that would not last past noon. Garrett drove into Renner proper with Cinder in the passenger seat and spent the first hour at the county recorder's office where a man named Phil Odetz, who worked there alone and whose organizational system involved more memory than filing, pulled the records on 6 Meridian transactions without being asked twice. Every note had been signed by the property owner. Every note specified the same interest rate and the same foreclosure trigger. 5 of the 6 had been signed within 8 months of each other, which meant someone had been moving through this county in a concentrated season. 2 of the 6 signers were deceased. One had signed while in assisted living, which Phil Odets noted with a very slight tightening of his jaw, not as an editorial comment, but as a professional observation. Garrett photographed every document with his phone. He found the family of one of the displaced property owners that afternoon. The Fenner family had sold and relocated to a rental in Renner Town. The daughter, a woman named Sandra Fenner, 44 years old, broad-faced and tired, let him in and sat at her kitchen table and told him that her father had been visited 4 times by a man who drove a white truck with Montana plates and who had been patient and polite and had never said one thing to make her father feel threatened. He had just kept returning, and at some point her father had signed something, and then he had signed something else, and by the time Sandra understood what had been signed, the first note had become 2 notes, and the land was gone before the estate settled. "Did you keep any paperwork?" Garrett said. She brought him a folder. It contained a version of the same promissory note he had photographed at the recorder's office, plus a second document he had not seen before. It was an agreement waiving the right to a redemption period. He photographed those too. He went back to the house that evening, and Meredith had made soup, and he sat across from her and told her what he had found and what he did not yet understand. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she poured more coffee and said, "How does it help us?" "Not yet," he said. "But there's a pattern here that's more than one bad loan. The question is whether Harold understood what it was before he signed." "And if he did," she said. Garrett looked at the table. "Then he signed under pressure he didn't tell you about, and there may be a way to contest it." Meredith set down her cup. "Harold was not a man who signed things he didn't mean to sign," she said. "He was ill, but he was not a fool." "I know," Garrett said. "That's why I need to understand what he knew about them." She was quiet for a moment. "He served with someone," she said. "Years ago. Someone who went into land development after he got out. Harold mentioned it once, a long time before any of this. He said it with a look I did not ask about." Garrett went still. "Did he say the name?" Meredith thought for a moment. Then she said, "Sollers." The morning Garrett went to see Derek Sollers, the temperature had dropped 12 degrees overnight, and the roads out toward the commercial district on the south end of Renner were glazed with black ice from snowmelt that had refrozen. He drove carefully. Cinder sat upright and quiet. The Meridian Restoration Group operated out of a suite in a low brick building on Renner's main commercial strip, between an insurance office and a title company that may or may not have known what was happening next door. The building was clean, recently painted, nondescript. There was a small sign in the window and a locked glass door with a buzzer. Garrett did not buzz the door. He went to the title company instead. He went in and introduced himself to the woman at the front desk, a matter-of-fact woman in her early 50s named Gloria Hendricks, and explained that he was trying to understand the connection between several property liens and a specific lender. He had brought the photograph documents. Gloria Hendricks looked at the documents and looked at him and looked at the documents again, and then she said she would need to make a call before she could help him. She called someone he could not hear from the waiting area where he sat. The call lasted 4 minutes. Then she came back and asked him to follow her to a back office, where a man named Terrence Hollis, who appeared to be in his mid-60s and wore reading glasses on a lanyard, was already sitting at a desk with a file open. Terrence Hollis was the owner of the title company, and he had been watching Meridian for 14 months. He had not done anything about it because he did not know what to do. He had a suspicion, and he had a file, and he had 3 conversations with a man at the state attorney general's office who had said the appropriate things and then not called back. He looked at Garrett's photographs, and he set them in a line on his desk, and he looked at them for a long time without speaking. "This waiver," he said finally, touching Sandra Fenner's second document. "This is the piece I hadn't found in writing. I knew it was happening. I've seen 3 redemption periods that should have triggered and didn't, but I didn't have the paper." "Now you do," Garrett said. "The question is, what to do with it?" "The Attorney General's office," Garrett said. "They move slowly." "They move faster when the evidence is complete," Garrett said. "What else do you need?" Terrence leaned back. "I need to know how they're getting elderly landowners to sign," he said. "Because it's not just pressure. There's something in the process they use that I can't identify from outside." Garrett thought about Sandra's father, who had been visited 4 times by a patient. Polite man who never once made him feel threatened. He thought about Harold, who had been ill in ways no one had caught yet, who had signed a note, and then apparently tried to find a way to undo what he had done, or at least warn someone who might be able to. He thought about what Meredith had said. "He was not a fool," he said. "I think I can find out." He spent 3 days talking to the families, not just Sandra's family. He drove to 2 other towns and sat in 2 other kitchens and listened to 2 other versions of the same story. And from those conversations, a shape emerged. The Meridian representative had always arrived with paperwork that included a notice buried on the 2nd page that described the loan as an agricultural assistance program. The word program was doing a great deal of work. It gave the arrangement the texture of a benefit rather than a debt. And in 3 of the 6 cases, the signer had been told verbally that the interest rate was fixed when the written agreement specified a variable rate that adjusted quarterly. That was not careless language. That was the system. Garrett brought what he had to Terrence. He brought copies of every document he had photographed, organized into a packet. He brought his notes from the kitchen conversations, written by hand and transcribed carefully. He brought a timeline he had built, showing the concentration of transactions across an 8-month window. Terrence read all of it over 2 hours while Garrett sat across from him, with coffee he did not drink. Then Terrence picked up the phone and called a woman named Annalise Dre, who was the supervising investigator at the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and he did not get her voicemail. He got her directly. He was on the phone for 31 minutes. When he hung up, he said, "She's sending 2 investigators by the end of the week. She wants the original documents from the property owners, not copies. She's also interested in speaking with Mrs. Voss directly." Garrett nodded. "There's something else," Terrence said. He took off his reading glasses and held them. "I went back through the property histories last night. Meridian's liens on the Harold land appear to be a secondary position. There's an existing first mortgage on the property from a credit union that Harold maintained current until his death. Meridian's position is junior." Garrett waited. "A junior line holder cannot foreclose unless the senior lienho, the credit union, consents or the first mortgage is in default. It is not in default. It has been current." The kitchen that evening was the warmest it had been since Garrett arrived. Meredith had made a chicken pie, the kind with the thick crust that took most of an afternoon to do correctly, and she had put it in the oven without comment, and they had eaten it at the table where the documents had been spread for days, though she had cleared all of that away. Cinder had stationed herself at the edge of the kitchen, watching them both. Garrett told Meredith what Terrence had said about the junior lien. He explained it slowly and in plain language. He told her what it meant. Meredith looked at the table. "They frightened me," she said finally. "The letter from their lawyers. I read it, and I thought it was final." "They counted on that," Garrett said. "The letter is designed to look like the end of the road." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Harold knew what kind of people they were. He signed the note, and then he spent the next year trying to figure out what to do about it. He wrote to you because he thought you would know what he meant about what's wrong around here." "He was right," Garrett said. "He never told me," she said. Her voice was even, but there was something moving underneath it. "He wanted to protect me from it. He always did that, and I always hated it a little." Garrett said nothing. He was not a man who felt that silence needed to be filled. Meredith looked across the table at him. "What was he like?" she said. "Before, when you knew him?" The weight of that question sat in the room for a moment. "He was the kind of man," Garrett said slowly, "who noticed what was happening behind you when everyone else was looking at what was in front of you. He had a gift for it. You always felt accounted for when he was nearby. Like nothing was going to slip past." Something opened in Meredith's expression, and then closed again gently. "That's exactly right," she said. "That's exactly how it was." Annalise Dray arrived on a Thursday with a colleague named Marcus Webb, and they spent the morning at the title company with Terrence and the afternoon at the county recorder's office with Phil Odetts, and they arrived at the Voss property at 4 in the afternoon with 2 bankers' boxes already in the back of their state vehicle. They sat with Meredith for 2 hours. Garrett stayed in the kitchen and kept out of the way. Cinder stayed beside him. Annalise was a careful, direct woman in her early 40s, and she asked questions the way people do when they already know most of the answers and are building a record. Meredith answered every question in the same steady voice she had used since Garrett arrived, and at the end of the 2 hours, Annalise said that based on the documentation they had gathered, Meridian Restoration Group was the subject of an active investigation, that a notice of legal dispute had been placed on all liens pending review, and that the foreclosure action against the Voss property was stayed pending resolution. She handed Meredith a card and a reference number. After they left, Meredith sat at the kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Garrett made coffee and did not press her. Finally, she said, "Is it over?" "The immediate part," he said. "The land is safe while the investigation runs. The actual resolution will take longer." "But they cannot take the farm." "Not while this is open," he said. "And if the investigation finds what I believe it will find, not after it closes either." She nodded slowly. She looked out the window at the last of the afternoon light going across the pasture, long shadows from the fence posts stretching east. "Harold wanted you to find this," she said. "Harold wanted someone to," Garrett said. "He thought that might be me." "Was he right?" Garrett looked at the pasture, the light. The fence he had noticed on the first day was maintained well, and that he now knew Harold had maintained, until his hands could not hold the tools any more. "He usually was," Garrett said. The next morning, Garrett walked the fence line. He went out before breakfast with Cinder at his heel, and he walked the full perimeter of the 43 acres in the cold, clear air, the ground frozen underfoot, his breath visible. He was not looking for anything specific. He was doing what he did when he was trying to understand a place, which was to put himself in it and walk it and let it tell him what it was. It was good land, not spectacular land. Not the kind of country that appears in magazines, but solid, working land, with a creek bed along the northeast corner that would run good water in spring, and a stand of timber on the west face that had been thinned at some point with intelligence, not stripped. Whoever had cared for this property had understood what they had. He came back to the house as Meredith was putting breakfast on the table, and she handed him coffee without looking at him. And he sat down, and she sat across from him, and they ate without the conversation that people have when they are still learning what to say to each other. And it was not uncomfortable. Cinder lay under the table again in the same spot she had chosen on the first morning, and the house was quiet except for the sound of the wind of the ridge. After breakfast, Garrett said, "The barn needs work on the north face. The siding has gone soft in 2 or 3 places. I can fix that this week if you have the lumber." Meredith looked at him. "There's lumber in the barn," she said. "Harold kept it." "I know," Garrett said. "I looked." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long can you stay?" He had asked himself that question on the fence line, the same way he asked it everywhere. He had been asking it for 3 years. The answer had always been the same: not long. And then he had moved on, and the moving had felt like the only honest thing he could do, because staying felt like a claim he had not earned. Standing in the kitchen with Meredith across the table and Cinder pressed against his boot, Garrett understood something he had been a long time arriving at. Harold had known he was moving. Harold had known the nature of the debt Garrett carried, which was not a debt to Harold personally, but a debt to the kind of person Harold had been, to the moral standard Harold had embodied without ever describing it or making it into something that required acknowledgement. Harold had put a letter in a footlocker and locked the lock and given Meredith the key, which was the most Harold kind of gesture he could imagine, trusting the right person to know when the time had come. He looked at Meredith. "I think," he said, "I'm done moving for a while." Something that might have been relief crossed her face, though she held it quietly, the way she held most things. "The barn roof would be next," she said, "after the siding." "I know," he said. "I noticed that too." By the time the snow came again in earnest, in a proper December storm that laid 8 inches on the Voss property and sealed the county road for 2 days, Garrett had replaced the siding on the north face of the barn, fixed a drainage problem behind the chicken coop that Harold had apparently tried 3 times to solve and gotten 2/3 of the way there, and begun the preliminary framing work on the barn roof. He had also spent 3 additional hours on the phone with Annalise, providing supplementary documentation and connecting her with Sandra, who agreed to speak with the investigators directly. The picture that was assembling itself was larger than one county. Meridian Restoration Group had operating footprints in 4 states. The Attorney General's office was coordinating with counterparts in 2 of them. It would take time. The investigation would take longer than 30 days, longer, possibly, than the winter. The lien on the Voss property remained stayed, and Meredith's land was hers. Dennis Hartwick drove down from Millhaven 2 weeks after the December storm to retrieve his fence equipment that Garrett had borrowed and returned without enough explanation. He pulled into the Voss drive and looked at the barn and the finished siding, and Garrett standing in the yard with a coffee cup and Cinder at his heel, and Dennis said, "You found a place?" "Looks like," Garrett said. Dennis looked at the house, at the light in the kitchen window. He nodded slowly, the way men do when they are satisfied by something they did not expect to see. "Well," Dennis said. He took the fence puller from the truck bed. "You know where I am if the work dries up." "The work won't dry up," Garrett said. Dennis looked at the barn again, then at the 43 acres of winter, pale pasture rolling north toward the ridge. "No," he said. "I don't imagine it will. There is something about the human heart that takes a long time to understand what it already knows. Harold had known, in the way that men who have seen things together know, that Garrett was carrying a weight he had not set down, and that the weight was not guilt exactly, and not grief exactly, but something made of both, the particular burden of a person who has been saved and cannot figure out how to make good on it. Harold had known because he had carried a version of it himself, and had spent the better part of a decade working out how to live with that, and had arrived at the same conclusion. Be useful. Be present. Take care of what is in front of you. He had trusted that the man he knew would find his way to the same place. He had been right about that, as he was usually right about people. If you have stayed with this story, you have held something true about what it means to show up when someone asks you to, and about the particular courage it takes to stop moving and accept that a place has chosen you. The world asks us over and over to decide what we owe to the people we have not yet met, to the strangers whose grief is not our business until it becomes our business. Most of the time we find reasons to keep walking. Now and then, for reasons we cannot fully explain, we turn the truck around. May that be something you know in your own life, in your own way. May the people you love feel accounted for. May God bless you and keep your family close, wherever you find yourself tonight. In the evening, the kitchen at the Voss farmhouse was yellow lit against the dark, and outside the window the snow was steady and quiet across the 43 acres, covering the fixed fence posts and the repaired barn face and the frozen creek bed that would run clear and cold come April. Cinder lay by the stove with her chin on her paws, her rust and black coat warm in the firelight, her dark eyes following the room the way they always did, missing nothing. Meredith had found a photograph in the footlocker that she had not looked at the first night, a photograph of two young men standing in a yard somewhere, squinting into afternoon sun. She had put it on the kitchen windowsill without explanation, and it had been there since. Garrett looked at it sometimes when he was washing up at the kitchen sink. He looked at it and thought about Harold's words in the letter. You know what this land means. He did now. He was beginning to understand what Harold had meant about more than that.